Welcome back today, you guys. So I've been trying new recipes, and more or less because of my personal relationship with food. I've been through so many different types of meal planning, prepping. I did fitness competitions. I dance professionally. I've learned so many different things. I've tried so many things that I'm just trying to feel a little bit more free with my food choices. And so trying to get that stigma out of my own head about what foods are good for me and not good for me. So that case, I've been doing a lot of my own different recipes. One of my favorite things to do is manipulate recipes, all that kind of stuff, to where I can pick the foods that I know feel better in my body. Like, I can't do dairy. Dairy just doesn't set well with my system. It's not because I don't want it, it's because my body doesn't want it. So huge difference between learning what your body actually enjoys. So today we're actually going to do a cookie recipe. Yeah, cookies. Enjoy your life. It's all about balance and choosing what you put in your body. So I don't use refined sugars. I don't use processed floured, bleached flours. I still choose ingredients that are whole and actually meant to do what they're meant to do. So a couple of things that I'm going to share with you is ingredients that I decided to swap out for my recipe in general. I'm going to post the recipe as is, and then you can choose to do with what you want. So food alteration. So the first thing I normally do is I switch out my flour. I do normal gluten-free baking flour, but this time I decided to go with coconut flour. Again, because of the dairy thing, I normally always pick a dairy alternative. So normally I have almond milk, coconut milk, or plant-based milk on hand, and butter. So this is a new brand that I've tried, but this is made from plants, but it's the same creamy consistency as you would buy normal butter. And then I've actually started adding in half of my recipe is going to be flour, and the other half is going to be a protein supplement. So normally I don't always do that. My body always doesn't 100% enjoy processed protein powders, but I did decide to do a plant-based powder that has superfoods into it. So if you were to buy like a greens mix to add in more vegetable content, that's kind of what I did with my protein. So I did half of my coconut flour, then half of that as well. So that's things that you can put in and out of this recipe. I'm gonna put the recipe up as is, but then you can refer back to this video and just, switch alternatively what you wanna do too. So I'm gonna go ahead and start mixing the base of these, and then we'll come back and I'll kind of show you the tips and tricks of why to do certain things on the instructions with this video. Melting your butter halfway. I melt it halfway and then I stick it in a bowl and then kind of mix it around so it comes out with a liquidy texture. The reason why you want it liquidy but at a cool state is because when you go to add in your eggs, the butter can actually cook your egg, which does a different consistency. So just make sure that as you're doing your mixture with your butter into your ingredients, when it says melt it halfway, when it starts melting, just dump it into a bowl and then stir and mix it, because it'll melt the rest of the way by itself. But that's just so you don't cook your egg in its state, because then it'll make a different texture for your eggs and how it cooks. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and mix everything. I'm gonna put it onto the baking sheet. When you do the baking sheet, I highly recommend parchment paper. It heats up differently when you use a cookie sheet. So recipes that ask for parchment paper, it's because it heats up differently. It's not just because it's kind of nice because you don't have to dirty your pan in a specific way, but it's because of the heating and how it might stick to your pan and how it actually might cook your recipe differently. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix all of this, and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's ready to put in the oven. Okay, so I actually hit 2 birds with 1 stone. Try to be efficient. So your dough has to sit in the fridge for about 10-15 minutes. So I recorded you guys a workout while I was waiting. Otherwise, depending on the ingredients, so like I said, I put half of my flour into there, and then I did half with my protein powder. So the consistency, depending on the type of protein powder you use, it can be a little bit more grainy versus being more fluffy, like a flour mixture. So make sure that if it doesn't have a dough sticky consistency after it's even cooled, put in a little bit more butter, so that way it's like a binding agent. So once it cools, it helps that settle in together. So melt a little bit more butter, kind of mixture it in a little bit more, and then put it back in the fridge for maybe 3 to 5 minutes. Otherwise, it should stick in little round. I do about 1 inch spheres, because I like a little bit more like snack size versus like actual bigger cookies. Plus I feel like, you know, more versus less kind of a thing, even though it's the same. So I do about that. You're going to put it in the oven like that, and then in between, after about like 7 to 9 minutes, we're gonna pull them out, and I'm gonna show you how to flatten them out so that way they stay super nice and moist without overcooking, and they'll stay that way for a long time. Okay, so you wanna pull them out when they're still in their ball shaped forms. They won't actually flatten out like real cookies because of the consistency, because these cookies are meant to stay super, super moist. So when you do pull them out of the oven, they'll still be in like their ball shaped form, but they're still soft. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna take a spoon, or you can take your thumb or a fingertip, and I'm just gonna slightly push them down so they kind of create that like crumble cookie look. So you can't have them sit in the oven and bake for too long, otherwise they'll like flake apart, kind of like this one. This one's probably a little too long when they start creating that cookie shape. So I probably could have pulled these out a little sooner, because most of them should come out like more like flat cookies. And then you're gonna put them back in the oven for just a couple more minutes. So depending on how big you actually make these cookies is, you know, how many you're actually gonna get out of it. The normal recipe should be about 16-ish, like normal size cookies. Again, I make mine a little bit more bite size, so that way I feel like I can have 2 or 3 in my serving instead of just 1. Again, it's how my brain works, don't understand. But otherwise, these are my tips and tricks to making these cookies. I like to make them with gluten-free flour a little bit more. I've been kind of playing around with using like almond meal or coconut flour is the first time I've used this. I know with coconut flour tends to be more dry. So I do have to add in a little bit more liquids and butter and milk and all that kind of stuff to make the consistency the way it is. But play around with the recipe, whether you use just flour, whether you decide to, you know, do what I do and take out the dairy out of it or put in the protein into it. Make this recipe yours. Again, I post these as is. I love to create things out of things that I've already done, so that's why I can play around with them a little bit more. But otherwise, if you have questions like this, post down to see what else you would like to see from me, and otherwise, enjoy your cookies.